Hey there, good people. My name's Mike, and I'm what you would call a disabled gamer. I have the disorder spinal muscular atrophy, or SMA for short. It creates a mutated gene that affects the motor neurons in my body and weakens my muscles over time. Thankfully, it didn't paralyze me at all. My brain developed normally. However, as far as my arms and hands go, I have a pretty limited range of motion. Basically, I'm a glorified mutant, but without the cool superpowers. Anyway, living a mostly sedentary life, I didn't have a whole lot of options when it came to normal activities for a kid, but naturally it was because of this I was introduced to the wonderful world of video games. And man, did I fall in love with them. I first started playing video games when I was 4 years old, and I'm 23 now. On top of all the usual reasons of loving games for their stress-relieving tendencies and escapism, they gave me some much-needed control in my life, especially for a kid stuck in a wheelchair. So, long story short, video games are awesome, and they've been part of my life since before I can even remember. They've influenced me so much that I thought I would take a crack at reviewing them for a change. Maybe share my opinion and get a little feedback, but that'll only be part of it. You see, I also want to shed some light on a particular problem in gaming that I personally believe goes overlooked far too often. That problem is optional controls in video games. Maybe this way I can share some experiences from a disabled gamer's point of view. Well, ever since as early as the NES era of gaming, I've owned a console, and for the most part, I've never had much trouble playing the games I bought. That is, until around the 6th generation of gaming, with PS2 and Xbox. After that, I started noticing a trend. Games were becoming more and more limited with their control options. A lot of it had to do with the rise in popularity of the modern-day shooter. You see, before the second analog stick was made available, first-person shooters originally used a control scheme called legacy controls. The best examples include games like GoldenEye and Turok, which basically made the main analog stick turn the player left and right and move backwards and forwards, while other buttons made the player strafe left and right and look up and down. For many disabled gamers, legacy controls are still essential for them to play a shooter, myself included. Well, with the arrival of better consoles, introduced better frame rate and allowed for more enemies to be on screen at once. With first-person shooters, this meant more precision and faster reaction times. It seemed like because of the continuous technological progression in gaming, developers wanted to fill up space on the controller with more button commands, thus making video game controls more complex and, in my opinion, alienating a large portion of gamers in the process. To combat this problem, I've stuck to playing shooters on PC, since they're usually more generous with control options. However, not all games are ported to the PC, and even when sticking to this rule, the most recent generation of consoles has still been hard to deal with because, unfortunately, now shooters aren't the only genre with limited controls. Very specific control schemes are becoming the default in games with very little flexibility. There's been considerable emphasis on using the analog stick buttons and trigger buttons for menial tasks in games. I feel like most developers just assume that gamers will learn to adapt accordingly to the controls, since they are minor changes to most people. The problem is, with disabled people like me, it's not so much about adapting, but more so about physical limitation. For instance, there are some buttons on the PS3 controller that I just can't press on my own. R3 and L3 are a few of those. The way I have to hold the controller makes it impossible for me to press them. What do I do when that happens, you may be thinking? Well, there's not much I can do. I shut the game off and I take it back, or I ask somebody to help me. And let me tell you, asking somebody to help me play a video game makes it way less fun. Many disabled gamers have similar problems, and when this happens, it basically renders the game unplayable from that point on. Just imagine buying a $60 game that you've been wanting to play for a long time, only to realize you're unable to play it because of a simple lack of optional controls. It's definitely frustrating. I know, I can probably guess what you're thinking. Like, this can't be as big a deal as you're making it out to be, and aren't your preferences a little too specific? Or, how many disabled gamers could there really be? And honestly, not too long ago, I'd be inclined to agree with that. I used to feel the same way. I thought that I was definitely in a small minority, and if there were people who had similar problems, there wouldn't be enough of them for it to matter. However, I recently stumbled upon some information that kinda opened my eyes to the whole thing. I found out that not only are there millions of disabled gamers out there with the same type of issues, but the amount of work needed to put optional controls in the game isn't nearly as time-consuming as some would think. Sure, developers are more often than not boxed into a corner by time constraints or overbearing publishers who push them to include or not include many things in their video game. It's just that the amount of time and effort it takes to put in things like remappable controls or even an aim assist wouldn't be too hard to accomplish. Hey, I mean, I could sit here and try to talk to you blue in the face about including more accessible controls because it's the right thing to do or because video games should be considerate the minority, but I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'll just say this. I realize that at its core, the game industry, like any other business, is out to earn money. With this in mind, understand that there are literally millions of gamers out there that want to buy these games and play them, but because of a few simple options left out of the game, they're unable to. Disabled gamers only want to be able to play the game they buy. I don't know about you, but a few extra weeks of programming sound like a small price to pay for the added money developers will undoubtedly be making in the long run. Anyway, I guess I should probably get back to my main point, which is why I'm even making this video to begin with. I want to review games so I can help bring to light some of these issues with game controls. Of course, I plan on reviewing games like most people do by looking over the story, design, and gameplay, but I'll also be putting a big emphasis on whether or not the controls in the game are easily accessible. I'll consider things like, can the controls be remapped, or is there an auto lock available? Things like that. In my reviews to come, I'll probably go into more detail about what I think games can do to improve their controls later, but for now, if you'd like to know more, definitely check out the Includification program made by ablegamers.com. Their website itself is a site that caters to disabled gamers' needs, and they just recently released a pretty knowledgeable open letter to developers, basically showing them many different ways developers can make their games more accessible to the over 33 million disabled gamers out there. It's a pretty detailed list, so I'll put a link to it down in the description box. Take a look if you get the chance. So, there you have it. I'll be uploading my first review in the coming weeks. Hopefully I can save you guys some time and money letting you know about a game's controls, or if you can even play the game you might want to buy. Who knows? Maybe more disabled gamers will get a voice this way. But I have a feeling a whole lot of gamers, disabled and non-disabled alike, want more control options in games too. If my reviews can help you out, I'll be happy. I'm your Crippled Critic, and I'll see you later.